The wind shrieked like a gutted animal. It came from the north, a solid wall of alkali dust and pulverized grit that turned noon into a bruised, yellow twilight. Willa Holt leaned low over the neck of her lathered bay, the taste of mud and iron in her mouth. The horse, Apollo, was a magnificent animal, bred for endurance, but the storm was skinning them both alive. She had been riding for 6 hours. 6 hours since she had climbed out the window of the chapel on her father's ranch, leaving Silas Croft waiting at the altar. The dress was a mockery. Her father, Thaddeus Holt, had ordered it from St. Louis, a confection of ivory satin and Belgian lace that cost more than a dozen good bulls. Now, it was her shroud. The delicate lace sleeves were ripped to the elbow, snagged on greasewood and juniper. The hem, heavy with mud and burrs, slapped wetly against her boots. She had lost the veil an hour ago. A streamer of white silk caught on a spike of yucca, a pale flag of surrender she refused to honor. Willa was not surrendering. She was running. For 20 years, she had been property, Thaddeus Holt's daughter, a bargaining chip, an asset to be polished, displayed, and, today, traded. This marriage was not a union. It was an annexation. It would merge the Holt lands with the Croft Empire, creating a fist of cattle and capital big enough to crush every small rancher in the Wyoming Territory. And Willa, the intelligent, sharp-witted daughter who ran her father's ledgers and knew the land better than his foreman, was the price. She risked a glance over her shoulder. The dust was too thick to see more than 20 yards, but she did not need to see. She could hear them. Hoofbeats, 2 riders, gaining on her. They were not wedding guests. They were retrievers, men paid by her father, men who would not be gentle. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her throat. She spurred Apollo, driving him off the relative safety of the cattle track and into the raw, broken country. The horse stumbled, coughing, as they descended into a shallow arroyo. The wind was louder here, a hollow roar in the canyon. She rode through the fading, sulphurous light until nightfall collapsed on top of the storm. The temperature plummeted. The dust turned to a freezing mud as a squall of rain hit, plastering the ruined satin to her skin. She was shaking so hard she could barely hold the reins. Apollo sensed the danger before she did. He threw his head, snorting, skidding to a halt at the edge of a precipice. Willa stared into the dark. She could not see the water, but she could hear it, a deep, churning growl. The Graybull River, swollen with spring melt and the sudden downpour. It was a torrent, white-flecked and furious, easily 40 yards across. Behind her, a shout. "There, by the cut bank!" A lantern beam swung through the gloom. Catching her, 2 men, Jeb and Hank. Shadows in long dusters, perhaps half a mile back. They were coming fast. Willa looked at the river. To be caught meant returning to Silas, meant a life of smiling obedience while her soul shriveled. It meant the end of her. She backed the horse up, turned him, and kicked him hard toward the water. Apollo screamed, a sound of pure terror, but he obeyed. They hit the river in a crash of icy water that stole Willa's breath. The current seized them instantly, dragging them downstream. The horse was swimming, fighting for its life, but the weight of Willa and her waterlogged dress was pulling him under. She heard a gunshot, a flat crack that was swallowed by the storm. The men were at the bank, but they would not follow. Not into this. The horse was failing. Willa slid off his back, clinging to the saddle horn with one hand, kicking her legs, trying to lessen the burden. The water was not just cold. It was violent. It felt like being beaten with frozen hammers. Her body went numb. Her grip loosened. "No, not like this." She let go of the saddle and struck out for the far bank. She was a strong swimmer, but the dress was an anchor. She fought the layers of satin, tearing at the bodice, her lungs burning. A log, unseen in the blackness, slammed into her ribs, driving the last of the air from her body. She sank, the roar of the water filling her head, then, mercifully, nothing. Colt Maddox cursed the storm, the rancher who had sold him shoddy wire, and the particular cow that had decided to test it. He was splicing a break in his northern fence line, his knuckles raw and bleeding in the cold. The wind cut through his canvas jacket as if it were cheesecloth. This land was high, mean country, and it demanded a man's full attention, or it would take him apart piece by piece. His homestead was not much, a sturdy dugout built into the side of a hill, a small, warm barn, and 300 acres of scrappy grazing land that he had bled for. It was his, it was the only thing that had ever been his. He finished the twist, pulled the wire taut, and grunted with satisfaction. As he stood to gather his tools, something caught his eye. A patch of white, down by the creek bed that fed off the gray bull. He squinted. A dead antelope, maybe, washed down by the storm, but it was too large. He picked up his rifle. He never went anywhere without it, and walked toward the shape. The rain was letting up, the storm passing south, but the air was bitter. As he got closer, his gut tightened. It was not an animal. It was a person, face down in the mud and gravel. He broke into a run, dropping his tools. He knelt, grabbing a shoulder, and turned the body over. Colt stopped breathing. It was a woman. No, it was a girl, and he knew her. Willa Holt. But it was not the Willa Holt he remembered, not the pristine daughter of the Thaddeus Holt, the girl in polished boots and tailored riding habits. This creature was drowned, bruised, her face streaked with mud, lips a deep, unsettling blue. She was wrapped in what looked like $1,000 worth of ruined white satin. "Hell," he whispered. The word was ripped away by the wind. He pressed 2 fingers against her neck. He waited. Nothing. He pressed harder, searching. A flicker, faint, thready, but it was there. He looked around. His cabin was half a mile away. The river was a death trap. Whoever she was running from, they were on the other side. He was alone out here. He could leave her. He could walk away. It was, perhaps, what she deserved. He had every reason to. Colt swore again. A long, rough sound. He scooped her out of the mud. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of wet rags and cold bones. He cradled her against his chest, shielding her from the wind with his own body, and started the long walk back to his dugout, his bad leg aching with every step. Willa woke to the smell of wood smoke and strong coffee. She was warm, impossibly warm. She was wrapped in 3 heavy wool blankets, and the heat stinging her skin was so intense it was almost painful. She opened her eyes. The light was dim, coming from a single kerosene lamp on a rough-hewn table. The ceiling was low, made of stripped pine logs. A rifle rack held a Winchester and a shotgun. The room was small, barely 12 feet square, and meticulously clean. She was on a narrow cot. Her dress, her wedding dress, was gone. She was wearing a man's flannel undershirt, ludicrously large, that smelled of soap and leather. A figure moved in the shadows by the stove. "You're alive, then." The voice was low, rough, like stones grinding together. Colt Maddox stepped into the light. He had not changed. Not really. He was still tall, still lean in that way of men who worked too hard and ate too little. The lines around his eyes were deeper, carved by sun and suspicion. His black hair was shaggy, needing a cut, and the scar was still there, a pale, puckered line that ran from his left temple down to his jaw, pulling one side of his mouth into a permanent, grim expression. He held a tin mug of coffee, watching her over the rim. There was no pity in his eyes, only a flat, hard assessment. "Colt," she whispered. Her throat felt like it was full of sand. "Miss Holt." He said her name like it was a curse. He turned back to the stove. "You were near gone. Drank half the Grey Bull." She pushed herself up on her elbows. A wave of dizziness hit her, and her ribs screamed in protest. The log, she remembered the log. My horse. Dead, most likely, or halfway to Nebraska by now. Your saddlebag washed up a mile downstream from you. It's by the door. He nodded toward the heavy wood plank that served as his door, braced against the storm. Your dress is in the stove. It was ruined. She blinked. He had burned her wedding dress. A hysterical laugh bubbled in her chest, but it came out as a cough. Good, she managed. I never wanted to see it again. He did not reply. He just watched her. The silence in the cabin stretched, punctuated by the howl of the wind. I know what you are thinking, Willa said, her voice growing stronger. Do you? He took a sip of his coffee. Doubt that. I doubt you have ever spent 1 minute of your privileged life wondering what a man like me thinks. The accusation stung, because it was true. Their history hung in the small, warm room, thick and suffocating. Colt Maddox had been her father's best horsebreaker. He had a way with animals, a quiet patience. Willa used to watch him from her window. He was the only man on the ranch who never tipped his hat to her, who never offered false compliments. He just worked. Until the day Silas Croft had come to visit. Silas, arrogant and flush with his father's money, had cornered Willa in the stables. He had been drinking. His hands were rough. Willa had frozen. Colt had appeared from a stall. He had not said a word. He had just pulled Silas off her and thrown him into a water trough. Thaddeus Holt's response was immediate. His daughter, affianced to Silas, had been insulted by a ranch hand. Silas, furious and humiliated, had his own foreman see to the punishment. They did not just fire Colt, they gave him a correction. They tied him to a fence post and used a leather strap. And Willa, terrified of her father, terrified of Silas, had watched from her window. She had watched them give Colt that scar. She had watched, and she had said nothing. You let them do it, Colt said, as if reading her mind. His voice was quiet, but it held a core of tempered steel. You watched Silas Croft's men lash me for pulling him off you, and you did not say one word. Willa flinched. I was afraid. We were all afraid. You were a Holt. Your word would have stopped it. He set the mug down. You said nothing. I am sorry. Colt, I was a coward. You were a Holt, he repeated. It is what you are. You use people, and when they are broken, you look away. He jested his shoulder. So what is this? What grand game are you playing now? Running around in a wedding dress? Did you finally get tired of the pearls and the parties? The condescension in his voice lit a fire in her belly that the river had not been able to extinguish. They were marrying me off, she said, her voice sharp. To Silas, to unite the ranches. Colt's scarred mouth twisted. So you ran from your fancy wedding right into a flash flood. And you expect me to, what? Hide you? Is that it? Hide you from your father? No, Willa said. She swung her legs over the side of the cot, the cold floorboards biting at her bare feet. The man's shirt fell to her knees. I do not want you to hide me. I want you to marry me. The silence that followed was absolute. Colt stared at her as if she had grown a second head. Then he laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound, entirely without humor. You truly are your father's daughter. You have lost your mind. I am perfectly sane. She stood, grabbing a blanket and wrapping it around her shoulders. She was weak, but her resolve was iron. I found my saddlebag. Is it intact? He nodded toward the door. Over there. She limped to the corner, her bruised ribs aching. She found the oil-stained leather bag, untied the straps, and pulled out a long, oilcloth-wrapped parcel. She brought it to the table and unwrapped it. It was a legal document, bound in ribbon. What is that? He asked, his voice wary. It is my inheritance, from my mother's side. My father never wanted me to know about it, but I found it in his desk. She spread the document open. It is a contract, a land grant, 2,000 acres of prime grazing land in the Willow Creek Basin. Colt's eyes widened. He knew that land. Everyone knew that land. It was sheltered, had the best grass in the territory, and, most importantly, it had water. "That land belongs to your father," he said. "It does not. It was my mother's, from her first husband. It passed to me on my 20th birthday, but with conditions. My father, trying to be clever, put in stipulations. He thought he was locking me into the marriage with Silas." "Stipulations?" "The contract only activates. The land only becomes mine if I am married," she said, tapping the paper, "and managing the property independently of my father's estate." Colt saw it now, the shape of her desperation. "He meant for it to transfer to Silas, for your husband to control it." "Exactly. He never imagined I would choose my own." She looked up, her gaze meeting his, clear and unflinching. "Marry me, Colt. It would be a marriage of convenience, in name only. We file the papers. We claim the land. You know that basin. It is worth a fortune. We can split it. You get 1,000 acres. Free and clear. 1,000 acres of the best land in Wyoming. All you have to do is sign your name next to mine." Colt looked at the paper, then at her. He saw the bruises on her face, the desperation in her eyes, the faint tremor in her hands, and he saw the same manipulative, calculating mind as her father. He shook his head, a slow, final motion. "No." "What? Why? It is 1,000 acres." "I am not for sale, Miss Holt." "This is not buying you. This is a partnership." "It is a lie," he snapped, his anger finally breaking the surface. "It is you, a Holt, trying to use the one thing you have, your name, your body, to get what you want. You think you can just walk in here, drowned and ruined, and purchase me, purchase my name, to fix a problem you created? This is not a problem I created. This is a cage I was born into." "It is a prettier cage than most," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "I have seen the world from the outside of your fences. Remember? You let them whip me. Willa, you let them break my face and run me off your land because you were afraid. And now you come to me for help because you are afraid again. What happens next time? When Silas comes? When your father comes? Will you be afraid then? Will you look away while they string me up for stealing you?" "I am not that girl anymore." "You are exactly that girl," he roared. "You are just colder. You think you can use this contract to buy a man, just like your father uses his money. You are no different. Get out." "I cannot get out. There is a storm." "The storm is passing. You can walk back to your father's kingdom." "I will not." As the argument hit its peak, Colt suddenly froze. He held up a hand, silencing her. He tilted his head, listening. Above the whistle of the wind, another sound, distant but clear. Men shouting and the jingle of harness. Colt moved with a speed that startled her. He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbed the lamp, and extinguished the flame, plunging the cabin into near total darkness. "What is it?" Willa whispered, her heart seizing. "Riders," he breathed. He moved to the wall, pulling aside the small piece of canvas that covered his only window. 4 of them, and they have lanterns. They are not just passing through. They are searching. Willa crept up behind him, peering through the gap. She saw them. 4 pinpricks of light moving slowly along the ridge above his dugout. Her father's men, Jeb and Hank, and 2 more. "They must have crossed the river upstream," she whispered, horrified. "They are hunting me." "And they know this land," Colt said, his voice grim. "They know my claim is here." He let the canvas fall, sealing them in blackness. "They will check this cabin. It is only a matter of time." Willa backed away from the window, pressing her hand to her mouth. She was trapped. trapped in a tiny, dark room with a man who despised her, while the men who wanted to drag her back to her cage circled outside. "We are trapped," she said, the words barely audible. Colt did not answer. He had moved to the door, his rifle in his hand. He was listening. The minutes stretched into an hour. The shouts outside grew fainter, then closer, then fainter again. They were combing the valley. Willa sank onto the cot. The blankets clutched around her. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with the river. "He will not stop," she said into the darkness. "My father? He will not stop until he has me back. This land, the contract, it is everything to him. He will see me dead before he sees me free." Colt leaned his rifle against the wall. He still did not speak. "You do not understand," Willa continued, her voice raw. "You see this dress, this name, and you see privilege. You see a cage, and you call it pretty. I see a life of being controlled by men. My father, my tutors, his foreman, and Silas." She shuddered. "Silas. He thinks because he is buying me, he owns me, the way he touches me, the way he looks at me, like I am a horse he is about to break." She took a shaky breath. "I have spent my entire life being silent. I was silent when they hurt you, and I have hated myself for it every day since. I was silent when my father planned this marriage. I was silent when I was silent." She stood up. The darkness made her bold. "This is not me running from something, Colt. This is me running to something. This is the first choice I have ever made. This is the first time I have ever fought back. This land is not about money. It is about breathing. It is the only inch of this world that is not owned by my father or my fiancée, and I will not let them have it." Colt finally spoke, his voice weary. "You are still playing their game. Willa, you are just trying to change the rules. It will not work. They will crush you. You are one woman. You cannot fight Thaddeus Holt and Silas Croft." "I am not one woman," she said, stepping toward his voice. "I am one woman asking for a partner. I already gave you my answer. I will not be your hired gun or your hired husband." "Because you are a coward," she hissed. "What did you call me?" "You are a coward. You are so wrapped up in your own scars, so sure that the world is against you, that you will not take a chance. You would rather sit here, patching your broken fences, than fight for something real. You hate me, fine, hate me, but do not pretend this is about your honor. It is about your fear. You know nothing about my fear, girl. I know you are afraid to trust me. I know you are afraid to risk what little you have." "You are right," he snarled, turning to face her. In the gloom, he was just a tall shadow. "I am afraid. I am afraid of you. You are poison. Willa, you are a sweet-talking, privileged little girl who gets men killed." He gestured to the door. "They are out there because of you. If they find us, they will kill me for just being in the same room as you. So fight with me." "I am done fighting for Holtz," he yelled. "I am done bleeding for you. Now get some sleep. If they are gone by dawn, you are leaving." He turned his back on her, dismissing her. That was his mistake. It was the same dismissal her father gave her, the same dismissal Silas gave her, the final, patronizing pat on the head. The rage that had been simmering for 20 years erupted. It was hotter than the river was cold. She moved before she even thought, grabbing his shoulder, spinning him around. He was bigger, stronger, but he was not expecting it. She shoved him, hard, with both hands. Colt stumbled back, hitting the solid log wall of the cabin with a thud that shook the rifle on the rack. Willa did not stop. She pressed forward, slamming her hands against his chest, pinning him there. Her face was inches from his. She was shaking, fueled by a terrifying, liberating fury. The borrowed flannel shirt and the heavy blanket fell away, leaving her in just the thin, damp undershirt. But she did not feel the cold. She was still half-dressed as a bride. The absurdity of it, the ripped lace and the mud and the rage, all collided. She was close enough to feel the heat radiating off his skin, to smell the coffee and the sharp, clean scent of lye soap on his clothes. He was staring at her, his eyes wide in the dark, stunned by her ferocity. He saw her now. Not the girl, not the privilege. He saw the animal underneath. "That contract is mine now," Willa snarled, her voice a low, vicious rasp that was more animal than human. "And I will not be silent. I will not be afraid. And I will not let you, or my father, or any other man tell me what I am worth." She pressed her forearm against his throat, not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to hold him. "Now, you will help me, or you will get out of my way." The night ended in bitter silence. She finally stepped back, her entire body trembling from the exertion. He did not move. He just stared at her, his chest rising and falling heavily. The scar on his face was a pale slash in the moonlight filtering through the window. Neither of them spoke. The shouts outside had faded. There was only the sound of the wind, and the ragged sound of two people breathing in the dark. Willa went back to the cot and huddled under the blankets, her back to him. She did not sleep. She stared at the log wall, her heart hammering, haunted by the gravity of what she had done, and what she had begun. Across the room, Colt Maddox picked up his rifle, sat on the floor with his back to the door, and began the long wait for dawn. He did not take his eyes off her. Dawn had not yet broken. The world was a wash of cold, gray light that bled through the canvas window cover. Colt touched Willa's shoulder. She jerked awake instantly, her hand flying to her throat. In the gloom, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. "They are gone," he whispered. The words were quiet, but they filled the small cabin. "They rode south, back toward the river. They will double back, but we have a head start. Get up." There was no trace of the anger from the night before. His voice was flat, impersonal, the voice of a man focused on a problem. Survival. Where are my clothes?" she asked, clutching the blankets. "I told you, I burned the dress. The rest was river mud." He tossed a bundle onto the cot. "Put these on. They are the smallest I have. They will be big, and they will be warm. We are not riding. We are climbing. We have to be off this flat ground before the sun is high." He turned his back to her, giving her the illusion of privacy in the tiny space. He moved to the stove, checking the small sack of provisions he had laid out. A strip of jerky, a small bag of oats, a canteen. Willa fumbled with the clothes. They were rough wool trousers, patched at the knee, held up by a strip of rope, a thick flannel shirt, the one he had worn yesterday, still holding a faint trace of his warmth, and heavy wool socks that swallowed her feet. The boots were the worst. They were his old ones, split at the side and stuffed with rags to keep her feet from sliding. She felt like a child playing dress-up, but the warmth of the wool was a mercy. Her ribs ached with every breath, a sharp, stabbing reminder of the river. When she was finished, she stood awkward and small. "I am ready." He looked her over once. His eyes, in the gray light, were impossible to read. "You will do." He handed her a heavy canvas jacket, stiff with old grease and work. "My horse, Buck, is strong, but he cannot carry two, not where we are going. I have a pack mule. You will ride the mule." He picked up his rifle, his saddlebag, and the sack of food. He paused at the door, listening to the wind. "Stay behind me. Do not talk, and ride like your life depends on it, because it does." He opened the door. The cold air hit her like a slap. The storm had passed, leaving the sky a bruised, fragile purple. The air was scoured clean. They did not go south, toward the river, or north, toward the mountains. Colt led them west, straight into the broken, labyrinthine badlands, following a game trail that was little more than a suggestion. The next 3 days were a new kind of hell. Willa had thought she knew this land. She had ridden it her entire life, on trails, with hunting parties, on her spirited bay, Apollo. She knew nothing. Colt took her into the high country. They left the sagebrush flats and entered a world of sheer rock faces, narrow ledges, and deep, shadowed canyons where patches of old snow, hard as iron, still clung to the earth. The mule, a surly beast named Silas, a joke that Willa did not find amusing, was stubborn, and she fought it for every single step. The first day, she was silent, her body a single throbbing ache. The second day, the ache turned into sharp, specific pains. The rough trousers rubbed her legs raw. Her hands, soft from a life of leisure, were not used to the coarse rope reins. They blistered. Then the blisters broke. They made cold camps. Colt was adamant. No fire. A fire could be seen for 10 miles in this clear air. They ate dry oats mixed with cold water and strips of jerky so tough she had to chew it until her jaw underscore ched. The nights were the worst. The temperature dropped so far below freezing that the water in their canteens turned to slush. They slept on opposite sides of a rock outcropping, wrapped in their blankets, shaking from the cold, neither of them speaking. Colt watched her. He never spoke to her unless it was necessary. "Water the mule. We turn here. Stay low." But he watched. He watched her pull the mule back from a sheer drop, her face pale but set in lines of pure stubbornness. He watched her reset her own grip on the ropes, wincing as the raw flesh of her palms met the fibers, but she never made a sound. On the third morning, she was checking her saddlebag, the one Colt had rescued from the river. She pulled out the oilcloth-wrapped contract, checking to see if it was still dry, and a small leather pouch. From it, she took a housewife, a small sewing kit her mother had given her. It held a needle, a thimble, and some thread. Colt was checking the mule's hooves. "What are you doing?" "I snagged my arm," she said simply. "On the ride, before the river. It needs closing." He looked. Her jacket was stiff with dried blood, and a long, ugly gash on her forearm had opened up again. It was inflamed and swollen. "Give it here," he grunted, reaching for the needle. "I can do it." "Do not be a fool. You will pass out." "I said, I can do it." Her voice was quiet, but it had the same edge as the night in the cabin. She threaded the needle with a steady hand. She took a long, shuddering breath, looked away, and pushed the needle through her own skin. Colt watched, his face impassive. She was white as the snow around them, sweating despite the cold. She finished the first stitch, pulled it tight with a small gasp, and then did the next and the next. 5 stitches in all, crude and uneven, but they held the skin together. When she was done, she wrapped the wound with a strip of cloth torn from the hem of the flannel shirt, her hands shaking so badly she could barely tie the knot. Colt did not offer a word of praise. He just handed her the canteen. "Drink. We are moving." But as he turned away, his expression was different. The pure contempt he had worn like armor was cracking. He remembered the girl who watched from the window, the girl who looked like porcelain, fragile and useless. This was not that girl. This was someone else entirely. Someone forged in the river and the cold. She was scarred, but she was defiant. That evening, the air grew thick and heavy, the temperature dropping even further. A high-country squall was brewing. "We cannot stay in the open," Colt said, his voice tight. "The wind on this ridge will kill us." He led them down into a narrow, pine-choked ravine. Tucked under a granite overhang was a structure. It was barely a cabin, just a 4-walled lean-to built of stacked rock and rotted pine, left by some hopeful miner decades ago. The door was gone. The roof was half collapsed, but it was shelter. "Clear it out," he said, sliding off Buck. "Look for snakes." They spent an hour making it habitable. dragging out old nests of twigs and desiccated animal droppings. Willa worked beside him, her movements stiff but determined. They were two shadows in the fading light, united by the simple, desperate need for shelter. Inside, it was tiny, not much bigger than Colt's dugout, and smelled of dust and damp stone. Colt used his hatchet to break up a dead, dry pine branch and, after a long hesitation, built a small fire in the rusted-out, broken husk of an old pot-belly stove. The smoke would be masked by the ravine and the coming snow. The sudden warmth was dizzying. Willa sat on a rotted log, holding her blistered hands toward the weak flames. The silence stretched. "My offer still stands," she said, her voice sounding loud in the small space. Colt stopped tinkering with the stovepipe. He looked at her, his face lit by the orange glow. "I told you, I am not for sale." "Stop saying that," she snapped, her exhaustion making her sharp. "This is not about buying you. This is about survival. You think those men are going to stop? You think my father will just let this go? They are not just hunting me anymore. Colt, they are hunting you, too. They know you helped me. You are a dead man if you are alone." He did not reply. He knew she was right. "Look at this." She stood and walked to him, pulling the contract from her jacket. She unrolled it on the floor between them. "I need your name, but you need my land." She jabbed a finger at the map. "You are breaking your back for 300 acres of rock and scrub. This—" She swept her hand over the parchment. "This is 2,000 acres of bottomland. It has the Willow Creek. It has water. Colt, enough to run 1,000 head." She knelt in front of him, forcing him to meet her gaze. "I am not that girl in the window anymore. I am not asking you to save me. I am offering you a partnership, a business deal, 50%. We split it down the middle. We build something so strong my father cannot touch it. We build a life." He looked from the contract to her face. He saw the new stitches on her arm, the soot on her cheek, the raw, bleeding skin of her palms. He saw the fire in her eyes. And it was not just desperation, it was intelligence. It was will. He remembered the girl who looked away. He looked at the woman kneeling in the dirt in his own oversized clothes. He still did not trust her. He could not. Trust was a luxury he had never been able to afford. The name Holt was poison. But 1,000 acres. Water. A way to finally stop fighting for scraps. His eyes lingered on her face, on her mouth, longer than he intended. He was seeing her, really seeing her, and it confused him. "I do not make deals with Holtz," he said, but the words were rough, the conviction hollow. He stood and went to the opening of the cabin, staring out at the first flakes of snow. "Why?" she asked, her voice quiet behind him. "Why do you hate me so much? I know what I did. I know I was a coward. But this is something deeper. It is not just the whipping. What did they do to you?" Colt gripped the stone doorframe, his knuckles white. The snow was falling faster now, silent and white, burying the world. He did not turn. He did not want her to see his face. "You do not know what a whipping is," he said, his voice a low growl. "You think it is just a beating." He was back there. He could feel the sun on his back, the bite of the ropes on his wrists. He had been an orphan, passed from ranch to ranch since he was 10. He had been kicked and beaten by drunken foremen, starved by stingy bosses. He was used to pain. He knew how to take it. But this was different. He had just started at the Holt Ranch. It was the first place that paid him a fair wage, the first place that had a bunkhouse that was warm. He was good at his job. He was breaking the wild ones no one else would touch. And he had seen her, Willa, riding her fine horse, reading her books in the shade. She was from another world, a clean, bright world. Then Silas Croft, drunk, arrogant, cornering her in the stable. His words, thick and foul. "This little filly just needs a real man to break her." Colt's rage had been instant. He had not thought, he had just acted. The Correction was not a spur-of-the-moment thing. Thaddeus Holt had watched, his face like stone. Silas Croft had smiled. It was not about justice. It was about teaching a stray dog his place. They had not just strapped him. They had used a bullwhip, the kind that tears meat from bone. "They did not just whip me," Colt whispered, his voice cracking. "They wanted to make an example. Silas, he wanted to mark me." He touched his face, his fingers tracing the scar. "This was the last one, from the butt of the whip, after I was down." He finally turned, and his eyes were burning. "And I looked up, right before I looked up at your window. And you were there, you were watching, and you just turned. You pulled the curtain." He took a ragged breath. "It was not the pain, it was you. You, with your books and your clean hands. You were the one decent thing on that whole damn ranch. And you looked away. You confirmed what they all knew, that I was nothing, an animal, disposable." Willa was standing, her face a mask of horror. Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving clean tracks in the soot. "I did," she whispered. "I did look away." She stumbled toward him, her hands outstretched. "I was so ashamed. I was so afraid of him, of my father, of what he would do to me. I was a child. Colt, a terrified, stupid child." "We were all children," he said, the bitterness coating his tongue. "I know," she sobbed. "I know. And I have lived with it every single day. I have seen what I did to you every time I saw my father smile. Every time Silas touched me." She stopped, a foot away from him. "I cannot take it back. God knows. I cannot. I do not expect you to forgive me. I never will. But I am asking you." He stared at her, his whole body rigid. He had carried this hate for 2 years. It was a shield. It was the one thing that was truly his, and now she was asking him to put it down. He saw her, not as a Holt, but as another broken thing, another person trapped by forces bigger than herself. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire and her quiet, desperate sobs. She raised a trembling hand. He did not flinch. Gently, her fingers so light he barely felt them. She touched the scar on his jaw. A jolt went through him, sharp and hot, like lightning. No one had ever touched it. It was his mark of shame, the brand of his station. Her touch was not one of pity or disgust. It was just a touch, a connection. His breath caught. He looked down into her tear-filled eyes. He saw her shame, her regret, her fire. He saw himself reflected in her. Without thinking, driven by a loneliness so profound it ached more than any whip cut, he leaned in. His hand came up, his thumb brushing the tear track on her cheek. She did not pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, her own hand still resting on his jaw. Their faces were inches apart. The world shrank to the tiny, fire-lit cabin, to the scent of pine smoke and damp wool and the clean, faint scent of her skin. He could feel her breath. He was going to kiss her. He wanted to kiss her. And that terrified him. He jerked back as if he had been burned. "Do not!" he snarled, his voice rough with a new, raw shame. "Colt?" she whispered, confused, her hand falling away. "Do not!" he repeated, backing away from her, putting the fire between them. "Do not use that. It will not work." "Use what? I was not—" "You think you can just touch me?" he said, disgusted with himself, with his own weakness. "You think you can cry and touch my face, and I will forget who you are? You think that is all it takes to get me to sign your damn paper?" "That is not what I was doing," she cried, insulted. "It is what you are. It is what you were bred to do. Use your softness. Use your tears. Well, it will not work on me. I will not be used by you again." He felt cheap. He was ashamed of his body's betrayal, of the sudden, fierce want that had risen in him. He had wanted something born of tragedy, and it made him feel foul. Before she could answer, a sound cut through the rising wind. A pop, pop, pop. Gunshots, distant, but echoing up the ravine. Colt moved instantly. He grabbed his canteen and kicked the fire apart, stamping out the embers with his boot, plunging the cabin into darkness.
"What is it?"
Willa whispered, her heart climbing into her throat. "They are close," Colt said, his voice hard, all trace of intimacy gone. "They found the dugout. They know I'm gone. They know I'm with you." He grabbed his rifle. "Those were not warning shots. They are not trying to retrieve you anymore. Willa, they are hunting." He grabbed her arm. "We have to move, now." They stumbled out of the cabin into the swirling snow. The world was white and treacherous. They rode for hours, pushing the animals hard. The argument from the cabin spilled out into the bitter cold, fueled by fear and the raw, exposed nerves of their near kiss. "Why is it so wrong to want something?" Willa yelled over the wind, pulling the mule alongside his horse. "This land, it is mine. It is my right." "Nothing is your right just 'cause a piece of paper says so," Colt yelled back, not looking at her, his eyes scanning the ridge lines. "Land belongs to who can hold it, who bleeds for it. Your father knows that. That is why he sent those men."
"And what about loyalty?"
she retorted, furious at his rejection. "I am offering you loyalty, a partnership. Is that so worthless?" "Loyalty is what I gave your father. Look what it got me. A scarred face and a patch of rocks." He looked at her then, his face savage in the snow. "And love, that is a fairy tale for girls like you. In your fancy dresses. Out here, there is just surviving. There is just holding on to what you can."
"You are wrong," she cried. "It is the only thing that matters. Without it, we are just animals, fighting over scraps, like you said."
He had no answer to that. He just kicked Buck into a faster trot, forcing her to follow. They rode until the mule was stumbling and Buck was blowing steam into great, heaving clouds. They crossed a high ridge, and Colt pulled to a sudden halt. The snow was lighter here, the wind softer. Below them, the world opened up. "There," Colt said, his voice flat. Willa rode up beside him. The terrain had changed. It was a vast, sheltered basin, miles across, protected on all sides by high, wooded ridges. Even in the pale light, she could see the grass was richer, the land less broken, and through the middle of it, a dark ribbon of water that was not frozen. The Willow Creek.
"This is it,"
she whispered, the contract in her jacket suddenly feeling heavy. It was real. She slid off the mule, her legs shaking from fatigue. She staggered a few steps, her eyes fixed on the land, her land. She walked to her saddlebag and fumbled inside. She pulled out the oilcloth package, and with it, a wadded, muddy, and torn piece of white silk. It was the remnant of her veil. It must have been ripped from her head by the river and snagged on the saddlebag's leather straps. Colt must have found it with the bag, assumed it was trash, and just stuffed it all inside. She held the ruined, filthy scrap in her blistered hands. It was her past, her cage, the symbol of the life she was supposed to lead. She looked across the basin. Near where they stood, an old, weathered cedar post stuck out of the ground, half buried in snow. An old survey marker. She walked to it, the snow crunching under her oversized boots. She did not bury the veil. She did not throw it away. With cold, numbed fingers, she untangled the scrap of silk and tied it firmly to the top of the post. It whipped in the wind, a tattered, muddy white flag. It was not a flag of surrender. It was a flag of conquest. Colt watched her. He watched her claim this land not with a gun, not with blood, but with the ruined totem of her own prison. "It is not his," Willa said, her voice quiet but carrying on the wind. "It is not Silas's. It is mine." She turned to look at him, her face set, the tears frozen on her cheeks. It is mine by will." Colt looked at the muddy flag, and then at her. He did not say a word, but he knew, in that moment, that he was no longer running. The line shack was not much. It was a relic, built by some long-forgotten rancher to shelter a single cowboy during winter line riding. It was 12 feet square, built of sod bricks and roofed with warped pine logs. A rusted three-legged stove stood in the corner, its pipe choked with an old bird's nest. Pack rats had turned the lone bunk into a fortress of dried cactus and sheep's wool. But it was 4 walls, and it was on her land. They spent the first day in silence, working. Colt, with a grim set to his jaw, was a man of practical action. He did not speak of the marriage. He did not speak of the veil. He simply worked. He cleaned the stovepipe, his arms black to the elbows. He kicked apart the rat's nest and threw the ruined bunk outside. He used his hatchet to cut fresh pine boughs and lay them on the floor for a mattress. A clean, sharp scent that cut through the years of dust. Willa worked beside him. She swept the floor with a branch of sagebrush. She used the last of their oats to make a thin, hot gruel on the mended stove. They ate it standing, on opposite sides of the tiny, cold room, the silence between them as thick as the sod walls. That night, they slept in the same room for the 3rd time. They lay feet to head, Colt by the door on his bedroll, Willa on the pine boughs, each wrapped in their own blanket. The cold was a physical presence, a heavy weight pressing them into the earth. Neither slept well. The next morning, Colt rose before dawn. He took his rope, his hatchet, and his rifle, and left. Willa panicked. She ran to the door, her heart hammering. He was just a silhouette against the pale gray sky, walking not toward his old homestead, but deeper into the basin. He was not leaving. He was working. She watched him for a long time. He was walking the creek bed, his long strides measuring the land. He was sighting along the ridges, his head tilted, reading the terrain as she would read a book. He was, she realized with a jolt, surveying. He was learning the land, her land. A fragile hope, one she was terrified to name, began to grow. She returned to the shack and, for the first time, sat with the contract, not to look at the map, but to read the words. Her father and his lawyers had drafted it. It was a trap, and she needed to know the teeth. She read it once, then a second time, her blood running cold despite the small fire she had built. The loophole was not a loophole. It was a noose. The outline stated the land was hers if she was married and managing it independently. But the fine print, the dense legal script she had skimmed before, was more specific. The marriage had to be valid in the territory of Wyoming. That meant posting bans. That meant a public declaration. That meant a county judge. And the independently managing clause was worse. It stipulated that within 6 months of the marriage, the land had to show significant improvement and habitation, documented by the same county judge. If she failed, the land did not just revert to her father, it would be declared unclaimed and put up for public auction, an auction Thaddeus Holt and Silas Croft, with their combined wealth, would undoubtedly win. She could not just sign a paper in secret. She could not just hide. She had to build something. She had to live here, as a wife, and prove it to the law. She put the paper down, her hands shaking. This was not a partnership she was offering Colt. It was a war. He returned at noon, his face grim. "That flag you planted," he said, not looking at her as he took the canteen. "It is on the wrong ridge. The survey marker is old. The true border is 1/2 mile east, at the creek." Willa just stared at him. "You know this land." "I know maps." He took a long drink. "And I know who is on the other side of that ridge." He wiped his mouth on his sleeve. "We have neighbors. Henderson's outfit. They are running cattle too close to the creek line. They are testing." "Henderson? He is a small rancher. My father—" "Your father has been trying to push Henderson out for years. Henderson needs that water." Colt pointed out the door. his voice flat. This basin, it is not just good grass. Willa, that creek runs steady, too steady for spring melt. There is a source, a buried spring, up high, a spring that does not freeze and does not dry up. He finally looked at her, his eyes cold and clear. You are not sitting on 2,000 acres of grazing land. You are sitting on the only reliable water source in this whole damn county. And it is a drought year. Your father does not just want this land, he needs it. And every other rancher for 50 miles, including Henderson, will kill for it. Willa absorbed the shock. The stakes, already impossibly high, had just doubled. This was not about pride. It was about survival for the entire territory. Then we have to make it ours, she said, her voice quiet. Legally. So even my father cannot take it. She explained what she had read. The bans, the judge, the 6-month requirement. Colt's face darkened with every word. Bans? In public? You are insane. It is the only way. You want to ride into town? Into town? Thaddeus Holt has posters with your face in every saloon and general store from here to Cheyenne. They are not looking for a runaway bride anymore. Willa, they are looking for a stolen piece of property, and I am the man who stole her. They are looking for Willa Holt, she said, not Mrs. Maddox. The name hung in the air, foreign and heavy. They will recognize you, he said, his voice flat. Maybe, she said, her mind racing. But they will not recognize me. They are looking for a girl in pearls and a satin dress. They are not looking for this. She gestured to his patched trousers, the grubby flannel shirt, her blistered hands, her hair, which she had hacked short with his skinning knife for lack of a brush, was a tangled, uneven mess. I am not her anymore. And me? He snapped. This face? He jabbed a finger at his scar. This is not one people forget, especially not in this county. We have to risk it. We have no choice. He turned away from her, his whole body rigid with fury. This is a lie I will not tell. I am not your husband. I am not your performing bear. I will not ride into town and parade myself like your prize. Then what will you do? She demanded, her own temper rising. Wait here until Henderson's men come for the water, or my father's men come for me. You said it yourself. Land belongs to who can hold it. This is how we hold it. Colt, with the law. He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her, and she saw the same flash of reluctant admiration he'd had when she stitched her own arm. He was a man of action, and she was, finally, offering a plan. A dangerous, stupid plan. But it was a plan. What town? He asked, his voice a low growl. Not Sheridan, not Buffalo. Too close to my father. It has to be Coulter. It is small. It is just a county seat. No one knows us there. Coulter, he spat. That is 40 miles. 2 days' ride. Then we leave tomorrow. The ride to Coulter was a silent, tense truce. They rode side by side. Colt on Buck, Willa on the mule. They were not partners. They were not friends. They were two conspirators, bound by a desperate plot. Colt was watchful, his rifle never in its scabbard, his eyes constantly scanning the ridges. Willa was just as tense. This was the first time she had been off her father's land, off Colt's claim, and truly in the world. Every distant rider was a threat. Every plume of smoke was an enemy camp. Coulter was not a town. It was a raw wound in the prairie. It was one muddy, rutted street, 2 saloons, a general store, a blacksmith, and a clapboard courthouse that looked like a strong wind would take it. Colt pulled up at the edge of town. Keep your head down. Keep your hat low. Do not talk to anyone. He was deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. He hated this. He hated the lie. He was a man who lived by a simple, harsh code, and this entire charade felt like a betrayal of himself. They dismounted at the general store, tying the animals to the long hitching rail. The street was quiet. Just a few freight wagons and a lone cowboy dozing on a bench.
We need supplies,
Willa said, her voice low.
If we are to stay, we need flour, salt, beans, and an axe.
One thing at a time, Colt said. The courthouse first. Post the bands. Then we leave. Colt, if we are to prove habitation, we need to build. We need supplies. He ground his teeth, but he knew she was right. He hated that she was right. Fine, the store, then the courthouse, then we are gone. The inside of the store was dim, smelling of coffee beans, cured leather, and dust. A bored-looking clerk in a green visor sat on a stool, reading a day-old newspaper. Willa moved straight to the back, picking out sacks of flour, beans, and coffee with a practicality that surprised Colt. She was not the girl who had her meals brought to her. She was a woman stocking a line shack. Colt stayed by the door, his hand near the pistol on his hip, his eyes on the street.
Well, I will be,
a woman's voice purred, cutting through the quiet.
Colt Maddox, I thought you were dead.
Willa froze, her hand halfway to a bag of salt. Colt turned. A woman was leaning against the counter, a bright red shawl draped over her shoulders. She was pretty, in a hard, worn way, her blonde hair piled high, her red lips painted into a perfect smile. She looked, Willa thought with a pang, entirely and completely female. May, Colt said, his voice flat. He did not look happy to see her. Last I heard, you got on the wrong side of Thaddeus Holt, May said, pushing off the counter and walking toward him. She moved with a liquid, rolling gait that made Willa acutely aware of the bulky, patched trousers she was wearing. They said his men ran you clear out of the territory. They were wrong, Colt said.
I can see that.
May stopped in front of him, close enough to touch. She ran one painted fingernail down the lapel of his jacket. You look harder. I like it. Still living on that patch of dirt up in the high country? Still am. Colt did not move, but his shoulders were rigid. Willa watched, silent. From the back of the store, she felt invisible. She was invisible. This woman, May, looked at Colt like he was a full meal, and she was looking at Willa like she was a stray, muddy boy he had picked up.
You should come by the saloon later,
May said, her voice dropping.
The Ruby. I am singing there now. We could have a drink for old times.
Her gaze flicked to Willa and back.
Unless your friend objects.
The dismissal was total. Willa felt a hot, dark emotion coil in her stomach. It was ugly and possessive, and it terrified her. It was jealousy. It was a raw, burning stake, claiming a piece of him she had no right to. Colt finally moved. He gently, but firmly, took May's hand off his jacket. We are just getting supplies, May, and leaving. May's smile tightened. She looked at Willa again, her eyes narrowing, taking in the hacked-off hair and the oversized men's clothes. Suit yourself, Colt, but you know where to find me if you get tired of farm work. She sauntered out of the store, the bell on the door jangling, leaving a trail of cheap perfume. The clerk had not looked up. The silence in the store was deafening. Willa turned back to the shelves, her hands shaking. She grabbed the bag of salt so hard her knuckles ached. Let us go, Colt said, his voice rough. We need the axe, Willa said, her own voice tight, clipped. We can do without. No. She turned to face him, her eyes bright with a fury he did not understand. We need the axe. He stared at her, baffled by the sudden venom. He paid the clerk, who barely grunted, grabbed the axe and the heavy sacks, and strode out. Willa followed him. They did not speak as they tied the supplies to the mule. The tension between them was a third living thing, vibrating with unspoken, unadmitted feelings. They walked to the courthouse. It was a single, dusty room. A bored-looking man with a large mustache sat behind a tall desk. "Help you?" he asked, not looking up from his ledger.
"We are here to post marriage bans,"
Willa said, her voice clear and loud. The man looked up. His gaze drifted over Willa's strange clothes, then to Colt's scarred face. He sighed, as if this was a great inconvenience.
"Names?"
"William Maddox," Colt said, his voice like gravel. "And—" the clerk prompted. Willa stepped forward.
Willa Maddox."
She signed the book the man pushed toward her. Her hand was perfectly steady. Colt signed his name beneath hers. His was a rough, angular scrawl. "That will post for 2 weeks," the clerk said, taking their money. "Come back after that. The judge can see you, if he is not on circuit." They walked out into the muddy street. It was done. They rode out of Coulter in the same thunderous silence. Willa was burning. She was burning with jealousy, with the humiliation of May's dismissal, with the raw, possessive need that had stunned her. She had no right. He had refused her. He despised her. And yet, she had watched that woman touch him and had felt a murderous rage. Colt was just as coiled, the lie, the public lie, signing his name to a Willa Maddox. It felt like a trap closing. And May. Seeing her had reminded him of a simpler time, a time before Holtz and land and women who looked at you with desperation in their eyes. He was confused, and it made him angry. They made it back to the line shack late the next night. After pushing the animals hard, the tiny room felt even smaller, charged with the unsaid. Colt took care of the animals, his movements jerky, efficient. Willa unpacked the supplies, slamming the sacks of flour onto the dirt floor. When he came back inside, the room was thick with tension. He could not look at her. He felt owned. He felt trapped by her plan, by her name, by her desperation.
"So that is it,"
he said, turning his back to her, ostensibly checking the stove. "We are Mr. and Mrs. Maddox. You are happy. You got what you wanted."
"I did not get anything,"
she retorted, her voice shaking. "We filed a piece of paper. That is not what I want." "I know what you want. You want this land. You want your revenge on your father. And you found a fool with a strong back and a name you can use."
"A fool?"
She threw the tin cup she was holding. It clattered against the wall by his head. He did not flinch.
"You think you are a fool? You think this is easy for me?"
"I think you are your father's daughter," he snarled, turning to face her. "You saw what you wanted, and you took it. You do not care who you have to lie to or touch." He stopped, his own words betraying him, reminding him of her hand on his scar.
"Touch?"
she said, her voice dropping.
"You think that was a lie, in the miner's cabin? I know what it was. It was a tool, just like this marriage is a tool."
"You are wrong," she whispered. She was trembling, but not with cold. It was the same rage from his dugout, but it was different now. It was mixed with the jealousy from the store, with the fear, with the undeniable, terrifying pull she felt toward him. "Am I?" he scoffed, turning away again. "Go to sleep. Mrs. Maddox. We have a lot of work to do to make this lie look real." He was dismissing her again. Like her father, like Silas, like May. She crossed the 3 feet of dirt floor between them in a heartbeat. She grabbed his arm, spinning him around. This time he was ready. He caught her wrists, his grip like iron. "Do not," he said, his voice a low, dangerous warning.
"Or what?"
she panted, struggling against his grip.
"You will throw me out. You will ride away. You are so afraid.
Colt, you are so terrified of feeling anything, you would rather call me a liar than admit the truth." "What truth?" he growled, shaking her slightly. "That you are a spoiled girl playing a dangerous game."
"No,"
she cried.
"The truth that you are not a tool. The truth that this is real.
She broke one arm free and grabbed the front of his shirt. Pulling herself up, she crushed her mouth against his. It was not a kiss. It was a collision. It was furious and desperate and raw. It was all the unsaid words, all the fear, all the loneliness of the last week. It was clumsy and angry and tasted of salt and coffee and dust. Colt froze. Every instinct told him to throw her off. She was a Holt. She was poison. She was the one who had watched him bleed. But she was also the woman who had stitched her own arm, the woman who had tied a muddy veil to a post, the woman who was warm and soft, and fighting him with a strength that matched his own. He did not push her away. Willa, sensing his hesitation, softened the kiss. Her hand left his shirt and moved to his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair. Her other hand, still trapped in his, went limp. She was not fighting him. She was surrendering. A groan tore from Colt's chest. It was the sound of a wall breaking, a wall he had spent a lifetime building. He let go of her wrist, and his arms went around her, pulling her tight against him. His mouth answered hers, not with anger anymore, but with a deep, starved hunger that stunned them both. This was not a lie. This was the only true thing that had happened. He kicked the door shut. The small room was lit only by the faint glow of the stove's embers. He picked her up, she weighed nothing, and carried her the single step to the bed of pine boughs. It was not soft, it was not gentle. It was raw and desperate and needful. It was two wounded souls who had been alone for so long. They had forgotten what it felt like to be touched. They tore at the rough, clumsy men's clothes, barriers to the warmth they both craved. He saw the bruises on her ribs from the river. She saw the network of old, silvery scars that crossed his back. They were a matched set, broken, scarred. He tried to pull away, his shame returning. "Willa, we cannot—"
"Do not,"
she whispered, pulling his face back to hers, her eyes fierce in the dim light.
"Do not speak. Do not think. Just stay."
He surrendered. He fell into her, a man falling from a great height. It was a clash of loneliness, a desperate, frantic claiming. It was fury and forgiveness and a profound, aching need. It was the only way they knew how to speak. Hatito. Long afterward, the shack was silent, save for the sound of their breathing. Willa lay tangled in the blankets, her head on his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. Then he moved. He sat up, pulling away from her, the cold air hitting her skin instantly. He moved like a man who had been shot.
"Colt,"
she whispered. He was fumbling in the dark, pulling on his trousers, his back to her. "Colt, what is wrong?" "This was a mistake," he said, his voice thick, unrecognizable. This was a mistake." He stood, running his hands through his hair, a caged animal.
"This is what I said. This is what you do. You...
"I what?" she said, sitting up, pulling the blanket around her. A cold dread was creeping into her. "You get what you want," he spat. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the door, at the escape. "You have my name. Now you have this. You have all of me. And when you get your land, when the judge signs your paper, what happens to me?" "What are you talking about?" "I am the hired hand. Willa," he said, finally turning, his face a mask of self-loathing. "I am the dirt under your father's boots, and I am the dirt under yours. You will get your fine ranch, and you will toss me aside. You will send me back to my patch of rocks with a few dollars for stud service." The words were so cruel, so full of his own pain, that they hit her harder than a physical blow. "You think," she started, her voice breaking. "You think that is what this was?" "That is what it is," he said. He grabbed his shirt and his jacket. He was leaving. He was walking out. "No," she said. He was at the door, his hand on the wooden latch. No! She screamed, scrambling from the bed, grabbing the blanket. She ran to him, grabbing his arm, spinning him around. She was naked beneath the rough wool, but she did not care. "You will not do this," she said, her voice shaking with a new kind of fury. "You will not run. You will not call me a liar, and you will not call me my father. I am not him." "You are a Holt," he said, his voice dead.
"I am Willa,"
she sobbed, hitting his chest with her free hand.
"And I am here. I am not that girl in the window. I am not some queen who will discard you. I...
She stopped. She had to say it, the truth. "I do not want you to stay because of this contract," she whispered, her eyes locked on his. "I do not want you to stay for the land. I want you to stay for me. I want you as my partner. I want you, Colt." He stared at her. His whole body was rigid, poised for flight. He searched her face, looking for the lie, for the manipulation he was so sure was there. He found only Willa. Her face was streaked with tears and soot, her hair a wild halo. She was fierce and broken and beautiful, and she was choosing him. Colt Maddox, the scarred, disposable hand. Slowly, his hand came up. He touched her face, his thumb tracing the same tear track he had touched in the miner's cabin. This time, he did not pull away. He did not speak. He just pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him, burying his face in her tangled hair. He held her as if she were the only thing keeping him from falling. The sun was just beginning to touch the highest peaks, casting a faint, pink glow into the shack. A new dawn. Willa woke slowly. She was warm. She was wrapped in blankets. And something else. A heavy flannel shirt, his, was draped over her shoulders. She was lying on her side, and a heavy, warm arm was draped over her waist, his hand resting on her hip. He was still asleep, his breathing deep and even. His face, in the soft morning light, was younger. The scar was just a pale line, not a mark of anger. The lines of pain around his mouth were gone. For a moment, there was no father. There was no contract, no bounty, no Silas. There was no war. There was just the tiny, quiet shack, the smell of pine and wood smoke, and the weight of his hand, holding her, as if he belonged there. For a moment, there was peace. The peace of that first dawn was fragile. It did not survive the full light of day. Not entirely. The moment Colt was fully awake, the reality of their situation returned. He sat up, pulling his arm away from her, and the absence of his warmth was a physical ache. He did not look at her as he pulled on his boots, his face set in the grim, shuttered lines she knew. "We need wood," was all he said. Willa, clutching the blanket and his shirt, felt a cold flush of shame. He regretted it. He regretted her. He had called her a liar and a manipulator. And in the dark, she had proven him right. She had used her body, even if she had not meant to. But when he came back inside an hour later, his arms full of firewood, he stopped. She was dressed, his old clothes looking even more ragged on her. She had been working, using the knife to caulk the gaps in the sod walls with mud and dried grass. He put the wood down and went to the supplies. He portioned out flour, salt, and water, and began mixing a crude dough. "We have 2 weeks," he said, not looking at her. His voice was rough. "Before the bands are done, before we have to see the judge." "I know," she whispered. "We cannot just sit here. Your father's men, they will be back. And Henderson, he is already testing the line." He punched the dough with a rough, angry motion. "If we are going to make this claim stick, we have to look like we are. We have to work. We need a fence, a real fence, on the east line, by the creek, to show Henderson where the border is." Willa watched him. He was not running. He was not casting her out. He was planning. He was working. "I can help," she said. He nodded. Once. I know. And so began the work. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of Willa's life. They fell into a rhythm that was not one of lovers, but of partners. The intimacy of the night was never mentioned. It existed in the space between them, a silent, volatile thing. But the work was what mattered. Colt took the new axe, and the sound of it biting into pine echoed through the basin from sunup to sundown. He was felling trees, trimming them, dragging them to the creek line. Willa worked beside him. She learned to use a shovel, digging post holes in the hard, rocky soil until her hands, already blistered, cracked and bled. She hauled branches. She helped him set the heavy posts. He was a relentless worker, and he expected the same of her. But he was not unkind. He showed her how to hold the shovel, how to use her weight, not just her arms. He rebandaged her hands for her at night, his touch rough but careful, his face impassive. Willa, in turn, made the line shack a home. She cooked the flat, dry biscuits on the stove. She kept the fire going. She used the last of their coffee, a shared, bitter cup in the cold mornings. She watched him. She saw the way his shoulders slumped when he thought she was not looking, the pain in his old leg, the constant, weary vigilance in his eyes. He had not said he believed her. He had not said he trusted her, but he had stayed. That was enough. After 12 days, they had a half-mile of sturdy, imposing fence running along the Willow Creek. It was a scar on the land, a declaration, this is ours. It is time, Colt said one evening, staring into the fire. The banns are done. We have to go back, see the judge, file the papers, make it legal. Willa nodded, her stomach tightening. Coulter. The ride was different this time. They rode with a shared, grim purpose. They looked like what they were, 2 hard-working homesteaders, exhausted, covered in dirt, dressed in rags. Coulter was the same muddy, bleak street, but something was different. The man dozing on the bench outside the general store was not dozing. He watched them as they rode in, his eyes sharp. Go to the courthouse, Colt said, his voice low. I will be right behind you. I need something. Willa watched him turn Buck toward the saloon, May's saloon. The ugly, hot coil of jealousy twisted inside her. He was going to her. Now that the lie was almost over, he was going to a real woman. She turned toward the courthouse, her face stiff. She waited inside the dusty room for 10 minutes. The clerk with the mustache barely looked up. Finally, Colt came in. He did not look at her. He smelled faintly of whiskey. We are here, Colt said to the clerk. Maddox, the banns. The clerk grunted, pulled out the ledger, and pointed. Judge Miller is in. He is not happy. Says you are wasting his time. Judge Miller was a thin, sour man who looked at them as if they were insects. He signed the paper with a scratch of his pen, took their money, and stamped it. You are married, he said, sounding bored. In the eyes of the territory of Wyoming. Now get out of my office. They walked out into the watery sunlight. It was done. They were legally, bindingly Mr. and Mrs. Maddox. It felt hollow. It felt like the biggest lie of all. Let us go home, Colt said, his voice tight. They mounted and rode out of Coulter, heading east, back to the basin, back to the land that was now, legally, theirs. But word travels fast in the high country. A name, posted on a courthouse board for 2 weeks, is a loud noise. Willa Maddox, née Holt. It was a story. It was a scandal. And Thaddeus Holt was not a man who abided scandal. They were 3 hours out of Coulter, following the shallow bed of a creek that fed into the Willow, when Colt pulled Buck to a sharp halt. What? Willa asked. Get down, he whispered. Now. She did not question him. She slid off the mule. Pulling her rifle, he had insisted she carry one now from the scabbard. Behind the rocks, he ordered, dismounting, pulling his own Winchester. There are 3 of them. In the cottonwoods, Upstream. Willa scrambled behind a granite boulder, her heart hammering.
Father's men?
Bounty men, Colt said, his voice grim. I heard them in the saloon. Your father posted it. $1,000 for you. Alive, 500 for me. Dead.
The whiskey?
He had not been seeing May. He had been listening. A shot cracked the air, and a chip of granite exploded from the rock near Willa's head. She screamed. Stay down, Colt roared. He fired back, a steady, measured shot. A yell of pain came from the trees. That is one. Colt breathed. He was calm. He was a different man. Not the quiet worker. This was a soldier. They are trying to circle, he yelled, firing again. They are splitting up. Willa peered around her rock. She saw a flash of movement to her right. A man, keeping low, running from tree to tree, trying to get a clear angle on Colt, who was pinned by the third gunman. The man stopped, crouching behind a fallen log. He was young. He had a shock of red hair. Willa knew him. His name was Tom. He was a horsebreaker from the South Ranch. He used to sneak her apples when she was a girl. He was raising his rifle. He was aiming it at Colt's back. Colt was trapped. He was firing at the man in the trees. He could not see Tom. No, not again. I will not watch. I will not look away. Willa raised her rifle. The metal was cold. Her hands were shaking so badly she could not hold the sight steady. Tom was leveling his rifle. No. She pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening, the recoil slamming the rifle butt into her shoulder, sending a shock of pain up her arm. She missed. The shot went wide, hitting the log. Tom spun. Startled, he saw her. His eyes went wide. He did not see a girl he knew. He saw a target. He swung his rifle toward her. Willa pulled the trigger again, and again, and again. She did not aim. She just pulled the trigger, her eyes squeezed shut, screaming. The sound of the third gunman's horse, crashing through the brush in a full retreat, was what made her stop. Silence. The world was utterly, profoundly silent, broken only by the rushing of the creek and a strange, high-pitched ringing in her ears. Willa! Colt's voice was strained. She opened her eyes. She let the rifle fall. Tom was on the ground. He was not moving. He was... She scrambled out from behind the rock and fell to her knees, vomiting into the creek bed, long, agonizing heaves that brought up nothing but bile. Colt was at her side. Willa, are you hit? She shook her head, unable to speak, wiping her mouth with a shaking hand. Colt, she whispered, pointing. Tom. Colt walked over. He looked down at the young man. He nudged him with his boot. He did not move. Colt looked back at Willa, his face pale and unreadable. He is dead. Willa, you hit him 3 times. She looked at her hands. They were caked with mud and blood from the post holes. They had just killed a man, a boy. She began to sob. It was not a cry of sadness. It was a raw, howling sound of pure horror. The reality of her fight, of her will, had just punched through her. This was not a game of contracts. This was blood. Colt, another voice groaned. They both spun. The other man, the one Colt had shot first, he was crawling out of the brush, clutching his leg. He was not a threat. But Colt was... He raised his Winchester, his face like stone, aiming at the wounded man. No! Willa shrieked, stumbling and grabbing his arm. Do not! Please, Colt! No more! Please! Colt looked at her, then at the man, who was begging, his hands up. Get on your horse. Colt snarled at him. And ride! You tell Thaddeus Holt. You tell him. His daughter is not coming home. You tell him this land is ours. Now go! The man scrambled to his horse and fled. Colt turned to Willa. She was still on her knees, shaking so hard she could barely breathe. He looked at the dead man. He looked at her. Then he looked down at his own side. His hand, when he pulled it away from his shirt, was covered in blood. Colt. He got me, Colt said, his voice faint. When I was pinned. It is just a graze. He took a step, stumbled, and fell to one knee. It was not a graze. The front of his shirt was dark and wet.
Oh, God,
Willa whispered. The horror vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp panic.
Get on the horse. We have to get back to the shack.
No, Colt grunted, trying to stand. Not the shack. They will go there. The one who got away. He knows. We cannot. Where, Colt? The old homestead, north. By the ridge, there is a root cellar, hidden. It took her an hour of heaving and crying and cursing, but she got him onto his horse. She tied him to the saddle with Colt's own rope, his body a dead weight slumping over the horn. She took the reins of both horses and the mule, and left Tom's body by the creek. She found the cellar just as he had described. As the sun was setting, it was a gaping black hole in the side of a hill. The ruins of a sod house collapsed around it. She got him off the horse, dragged him inside, and pulled the heavy, rotted timbers over the entrance. It was pitch black. It smelled of damp earth and rot and fear. She lit a match, a single candle, part of their supplies, guttered to life. Colt was pale as death. She tore open his shirt. The wound was in his side, low, near his ribs. It was dark and deep and bleeding steadily. She did the only thing she knew. She took her new, clean strip of cloth, pressed it to the wound, and held it, pushing with all her weight, as Colt groaned and passed into unconsciousness. By nightfall, he was burning. The fever took him. He was not in the cellar. He was back on his patch of rocks. He was in the saloon. He was at the whipping post. No, he moaned, thrashing, his voice thick. No, she looked away. She looked away. I am here, Colt, Willa whispered, bathing his face with a damp rag. I am here. I am not looking away. She sat in the dark, damp hole for 3 days. She did not sleep. She fed him water from the canteen, drop by drop. She held the compress. She kept the candle burning until it was gone. And then she sat in the dark. And she talked. She had to. She had to keep his spirit tethered to this world, to keep him from drifting away into the fever dreams. She had to keep herself sane. With the smell of his blood and the image of Tom's face burned into her mind.
It was not. You think I was a child?
She whispered into the blackness, her voice hoarse.
I was not. This is not the first time I ran, Colt.
He moaned, turning his head. I ran when I was 18, just to run, to be free for a day. My father, he sent men. They brought me back. She shuddered, the memory cold and sharp. He was so angry, not loud, cold. He hurt me, Colt. He told me I was property, that I had shamed him, and that he would fix me. She was crying, silent tears in the dark. To punish me, to lock me down. He married me off, a week later, to a man named Ezra, an old man, a widower from the North Range. He was not unkind. He was just cold. He never spoke. I was just a thing in his house. She choked on a sob.
I was his wife for a month, 31 days, and then the flood came. The gray bull. It washed the whole house away. It killed him.
Water, Colt whispered. So cold.
I have water. Colt, I am here.
She held the canteen to his lips.
I was a widow. I came back to my father's house. And the land, my mother's land, it was mine. The contract was from her. But now, because I was a widow,
It was mine. My father could not touch it. He was furious. She was pacing now, a frantic energy in the tiny, dark space.
So he made a new trap. This contract. The one I have. He had his lawyers write it. The land was mine, but it could only be managed after I married again. He wrote it for Silas. He was going to absorb me and my land into Silas's name. He was going to steal it back from me.
She knelt by Colt, grabbing his hand. It was hot and dry.
Do you understand?
She pleaded to his unconscious face.
This land, it is not just land. It is me.
It is the only part of me he has not been able to break, or sell, or kill. I am not running anymore. Colt, I killed for it. I am fighting for a place to belong. I am fighting for you. His hand impossibly tightened on hers. On the fourth morning, the fever broke. She awoke, slumped against the cellar wall, to find him looking at her. His eyes were clear, weak but clear. Willa? His voice was a dry rasp. She sobbed, a single, sharp sound, and threw her arms around him. He recovered slowly. It took a week of them hiding in the dark, damp hole, eating the last of their jerky, sharing the water. He was weak, but his body was hard, and it mended. He had heard her. He did not say so, but he looked at her differently. The last wall of his defense, the image of her as a privileged girl, was gone. He saw the woman who had been beaten and sold and widowed and had still fought. When he was strong enough to stand, he put his hand on her cheek.
You saved me.
You killed for me, he said, his voice full of a new, raw awe.
I had to,
she whispered.
I could not look away.
He left her there, in the cellar, with the rifle.
I have to go to Coulter, alone. I will not let him beat you. Not again.
He was gone for 2 days. When he returned, his face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. He is trying to annul it, he said, without preamble. He filed a petition. He is telling Judge Miller I kidnapped you, that I forced you, that our marriage was done under coercion to steal your rightful inheritance.
He is a liar,
Willa cried. It does not matter, Colt said. He is Thaddeus Holt. He has money. He has power. The judge is listening to him. The hearing is tomorrow morning.
What do we do? Run?
No. Colt's eyes were like blue fire.
We are done running. We are done hiding.
He had a small, leather-bound book in his hand. Her journal. He had found it in her saddlebag. He wants evidence, Colt said. We will give him evidence. He held it out to her. This, your mother's letters, if you have them, and my testimony, my face, my back. We are going to walk in there. Willa, we are going to walk into that courthouse, in front of the judge, and we are going to tell the truth. All of it. It was the most terrifying, insane plan she had ever heard. It was walking directly into her father's trap.
He will destroy us,
she whispered. He will try, Colt said. He thinks you are still his property. He thinks I am still his hired hand. It is time we showed him who we are. They rode to Coulter that night. A third and final time. They were exhausted, weak, and half-starved. They stopped on the ridge overlooking the sleeping town, the few lights glittering like fallen stars. The hearing was in the morning. Colt dismounted, wincing as he put weight on his side. He walked to her mule, looking up at her. The moonlight caught the pale line of his scar. Willa, he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. When we signed that paper with the judge, it was a lie. We both know it. It was for the land. Colt, it does not matter. It matters, he said, cutting her off. "It matters to me." He reached up, not to her boot, but to her hand, the one that was calloused and raw from digging post holes. He held it. "I have spent my whole life," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he could not name, "with nothing, just nothing, my name. It was the only thing I owned. I would not sell it. I would not give it, not for 1,000 acres, not for all the water in Wyoming." He looked down at their joined hands. "But I will give it to you." She slid off the mule, her legs weak. I am not a man who has words. Willa, I cannot say the things a man like Silas could, but I am asking not for a contract, not to make the lie look good for the judge." He looked up, and his eyes were so clear, so full of a terrifying, vulnerable truth, that it stole her breath. "I am asking for real. I am asking you to be my wife, not for the land, but for love, for us, for this, whatever this is." He was not kneeling. He was just standing there, a scarred, wounded man, offering her the only thing he had ever truly owned, himself. Willa looked at this man who had faced down her father, who had taken a bullet for her, who had listened to her darkest secrets in a fever dream and had not run. She stepped into his arms, careful of his side, and pressed her face against his chest. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, Colt, for real." The dust of Coulter was cold in the morning light. Willa and Colt stood before the courthouse, two ragged figures against the raw pine of the building. They had not slept. They had spent the night on the ridge, talking, and then not talking. The silence between them no longer one of anger, but of a shared, fragile future. "Are you ready?" Colt asked. His hand was at the small of her back, his touch firm. His side was still tightly bound, a dull ache, but his eyes were clear. "No," she said. Then she took a deep breath. "Yes, let's finish this." The courtroom was just the judge's office, cramped and smelling of stale tobacco and ink. Judge Miller sat behind his desk, looking even more sour than before. And they were not alone. Thaddeus Holt sat in a solid oak chair, his hands resting on a silver-headed cane. He was dressed in a fine black suit, his presence sucking the air from the room. Beside him, looking pale and furious, sat Silas Croft. A slick, well-dressed lawyer stood beside them. Thaddeus did not look at Willa. He stared at Colt, his eyes filled with a pure, possessive hatred. "Judge," the lawyer began, his voice smooth, "we are here to petition for the annulment of this arrangement. My client, Thaddeus Holt, is here to reclaim his daughter, who was taken from his protection by this man." He pointed at Colt, a known drifter, a violent man, who coerced, threatened, and— "That is a lie," Willa said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the room. Thaddeus Holt's head snapped toward her. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and his face contorted. He did not see his daughter. He saw the men's trousers, the hacked-off hair, the dirt under her nails. He saw the ruin. "Be silent, Willa," he commanded. "No," she said, stepping forward. "I will not be silent, not anymore." "Your Honor," the lawyer interjected. "As you can see, the girl is unwell. She has been held captive by this brute." He gestured to Colt's face. One need only look at him to see his violent nature, a man marked by his own brawling. Colt had been standing silent, his hat in his hands, his face a mask of stone. At this, he looked up, his eyes meeting the judge's. "This mark," Colt said, his voice quiet, rough. He touched his scar. "This is not from a brawl, Your Honor. This is from a correction." "Objection!" the lawyer snapped. "This is irrelevant." "It is the only thing that is relevant," Colt said. He did not shout. He did not need to. His voice filled the room. I received this mark on Mr. Holt's ranch from Mr. Croft's men while Mr. Holt and Mr. Croft watched. He looked at Willa, then back at the judge. Your Honor, they accuse me of coercion. I would like to show you what Holt family coercion looks like. Before the lawyer could speak, Colt unbuttoned his rough flannel shirt. He pulled it open, his back to the judge. The room was utterly silent. Judge Miller, who had seen bar fights and gunshot wounds and all manner of prairie violence, flinched. Colt's back was a ruin of old scars, a latticework of pale, raised welts, layered one on top of the other. They did this, Colt said, his voice flat, because I stopped Mr. Croft from forcing himself on Willa when she was engaged to him. This, he said, touching a long, silvery line, is what happens when you defy Thaddeus Holt. He turned, buttoning his shirt, his eyes never leaving the judge. This is the violence they are talking about, the violence they committed. He is lying, Silas sputtered, his face white. He was a disobedient hand. Then let me speak, Willa said. She stepped forward, laying her worn leather journal on the judge's desk. My father says I was kidnapped. I say I was sold. She told her story. She spoke not with hysteria, but with a cold, clear, terrible calm. She told of her father's rages. She told of the first forced marriage to Ezra, the one that had made her a widow. She told of her father's fury when he learned her mother's land had passed to her, free and clear. This contract, she said, pulling the worn document from her jacket, was not to protect me. It was to trap me. It was a tool to steal my inheritance back, to ensure it passed to my next husband, the husband he chose. She looked at Silas, her eyes dead. He was not marrying a woman. He was acquiring 2,000 acres of land and a spring, and I was the chattel that came with the deed. She is mad, Thaddeus said, his voice shaking with fury. This is slander. I was not coerced, Your Honor. Willa finished, her voice ringing. I was not taken. I ran from a life of being property. And I ran to the only man who ever treated me like a person, the man who was whipped for defending me. I asked him to marry me. I begged him. And he is not my captor. He is my husband. Judge Miller looked at the journal. He looked at the contract. He looked at the pale, furious faces of Thaddeus Holt and Silas Croft. And he looked at Colt, standing by Willa's side, his hand resting on her back. I have heard enough, the judge said, his voice dry. He picked up his gavel. This petition for annulment is a disgrace. It is an abuse of my time and of the law. He looked at Thaddeus. You will not use my court to settle your family feuds. Mr. Holt, I find the marriage legal and binding. The contract as written is valid. The land and the wife are not yours. He slammed the gavel. Case dismissed. For a moment, Thaddeus Holt just sat there. He looked at Willa, his face a dark purple mask. He did not speak. He stood, his lawyer and Silas scrambling to their feet, and he walked out of the courtroom. The silence he left behind was heavy. Willa sagged, her legs suddenly giving way. Colt caught her, holding her up. It is done, he whispered, his voice rough. It is over. They rode back to the basin in a daze. The world looked different. The sky was brighter. The land, stretching out before them, was no longer disputed. It was theirs. When they reached the line shack, they did not stop. They rode to the new site they had chosen, a small rise overlooking the creek. They did not speak of the judge or of her father. There was only one thing to do: work. They threw themselves into the building of their home. It was not a line shack. It was a cabin. They dug the foundations deep. Colt, his side healing, swung the axe with a new energy, felling trees, notching the logs. Willa worked beside him, hauling stone from the creek bed to build a fireplace. mixing mud and grass to chink the walls. They worked until their bodies ached, and then they fell into their shared bed of pine boughs, too exhausted to speak, and slept in each other's arms. The intimacy of their one night together had not been repeated, but it had been replaced by something deeper, a partnership, a trust, built in courtrooms and cemented with sweat and soil. A week later, they were fitting the roof beams when they saw the rider, a lone man, coming fast, a speck of dust on the prairie. Colt grabbed his rifle. Willa stood beside him, her own rifle in her hands. The rider was a deputy from Coulter. He stopped 100 yards away, holding up a hand. "Mrs. Maddox," he called out. Willa's heart leaped. "Mrs. Maddox. I have the signed order from Judge Miller, the legal transfer of title. It is all registered." He held up a packet of papers. "The land is yours." Colt lowered his rifle. He looked at Willa. A slow smile spread across his face, lighting his eyes, smoothing the scar. Willa dropped her rifle and ran to him. He met her, lifting her off the ground in a fierce, spinning hug that stole her breath. He kissed her, a real kiss, deep and sure, tasting of sunlight and pine and victory. "It is ours, Willa," he breathed against her mouth. "We are home." The celebration lasted less than a minute. From the ridge to the north, the same ridge Thaddeus Holt had used before, came the sound of hoofbeats. Not one horse, a dozen. Colt set Willa on her feet. The joy vanished, replaced by a cold, hard dread. "He is not coming to talk," Colt said, his voice flat. He grabbed her hand. "The shack, now." They ran. By the time they reached the sod building, the riders were in the basin. Thaddeus Holt was at their head, Silas beside him, and 10 men, hard men with rifles across their saddles. "The law is wrong, girl," Thaddeus Holt roared, his voice echoing across the land. "A piece of paper from a fool judge does not give you my land." "It was never your land," Willa screamed back, as Colt shoved her through the door. "Bar it," he yelled. The first shot shattered the small window, sending glass and wood splinters across the room. The world exploded into noise. Gunfire, heavy and constant, slammed into the thick sod walls. The shack was a good fortress. The sod absorbed the bullets. Colt knelt by the window, his face a cold mask of concentration. He fired, spaced his shots, made everyone count. "They are trying to circle," he grunted. "Get the other window." Willa grabbed her rifle. Her hands were shaking. Not again, not again. She looked through a crack in the wall. She saw movement. She fired. The battle raged for an hour. It was a stalemate. They were pinned, but the attackers could not get close without exposing themselves to Colt's deadly aim. They are falling back," Willa breathed, her eye pressed to the crack. "No," Colt said. "They are grouping. They are going to fire. They are going to try and burn us out." She saw it then. 3 men, dismounted, running low, carrying torches and bundles of dry brush. They were heading for the new, half-built cabin and the small cattle pen where the mule and buck were hidden. "They are going for the animals. They are going for our home." "Stay here," Colt commanded. "No, they will burn everything." Before he could stop her, Willa unbarred the door and ran, firing her rifle from the hip. "Get away!" "Willa!" Colt roared, giving her cover fire. Her sudden, wild charge took the men by surprise. One of them dropped his torch and ran. The other 2 raised their rifles. Willa dove behind the new, half-finished wall of the cabin. A bullet thudded into the log above her head. A third man, one she had not seen, came around the side of the cattle pen. He was young. He was Sam, the stable boy who had taught her to ride Apollo, who had always saved her the best apple. "Sam!" she yelled. He stopped, his face smudged with dirt, a mask of confusion. "Miss Willa?" "Sam, do not. It is me. Go home." "Miss He looked back toward her father. He was trapped. He raised his rifle.
I have to miss.
No!
Colt fired from the shack. The shot was perfect.
Sam spun, clutching his chest, and fell.
The other men, seeing their chance, opened fire on Colt, pinning him.
Willa screamed. She ran from behind the wall, not to her gun, but to the fallen boy. She fell to her knees beside him.
Sam, oh God, Sam.
He looked at her, his eyes wide, full of a terrible, uncomprehending pain. Miss Willa, why?
I am so sorry, Sam,
she sobbed, cradling his head in her lap.
I am so sorry.
It hurts, he whispered, and then he was still. The gunfire stopped. The silence was absolute, broken only by Willa's raw, broken sobs. She stood slowly, her hands covered in Sam's blood. She looked at her father, who was riding into the center of the yard, his rifle smoking. Colt was on the porch of the shack, his own rifle leveled, his face a mask of cold fury.
Look at you,
Thaddeus Holt said, his voice shaking with a terrible rage. Look what you have done. You have ruined us. You have spilled our own blood. He gestured to Sam's body. You have killed our own. He pointed a shaking finger at Colt. All for him, for a branded, worthless piece of drifter trash. For land. Willa began to walk toward her father. She was slow, her steps measured, her face dead. The grief had burned away, leaving only a core of pure, cold steel.
He is my husband,
she said, her voice clear in the silence.
And this is my home.
She stopped 10 feet from his horse. She was not afraid. She had killed Tom. She had just killed Sam. There was nothing left to fear. You accuse me of spilling blood? She said, her voice low.
You, who sent men to kill us for a bounty? You, who whipped a man for defending me? You, who sold me like a brood mare?
She shook her head, a small, tired motion.
You never knew me, Father. You only ever owned me.
Silas Croft, who had been hanging back, his face pale, urged his horse forward.
Thaddeus, maybe we should go. This is...
You be silent, Holt roared. In a blind rage, he dismounted, pulling his pistol. He lunged for Willa. She did not flinch. She sidestepped, and he stumbled past her, catching himself, his momentum carrying him into the half-built frame of the new barn. Colt was there in a flash, his rifle aimed, flanking him. It is over. Holt. They had him. He was cornered in the skeleton of their home. Thaddeus raised his pistol, his hand shaking, pointing it at Willa. Are you going to shoot me, daughter? He spat. Like you shot that boy. Are you? Willa looked at him. She saw a pathetic, empty, broken man. His power was gone. He had nothing left but rage. She reached into her jacket. Not for her gun, she pulled out the packet of papers from the judge. The legal, stamped, valid title. She did not raise her rifle. She did not raise her voice. She threw the papers at his feet. They scattered in the dirt. That, she snarled, her voice a low, vicious echo of the night in Colt's dugout, is what you wanted. That is what you killed for. She took a step closer.
But it is mine now.
Thaddeus stared at the papers, then at her. He saw no fear. He saw no part of the child he had raised. He saw a stranger, forged in his own fire, and she had burned him to the ground. He was defeated. His pistol arm dropped. He did not look at the papers. He looked at her, one last time with empty, hollow eyes. He turned, shoved past Colt, and walked to his horse. He mounted, his movements stiff and old. He did not look back. He said one word to Silas, home. Silas stared at Willa, his face a mixture of fear and pure hatred. He turned his horse and followed. The remaining hired guns, their faces grim, relieved to be done with this family's war, turned their horses and rode away. Colt and Willa were left standing in the yard, in the quiet, surrounded by the scent of gunpowder and blood. Next to the body of a boy Willa had known her whole life. The land was theirs. Willa began to shake, the terrible, consuming tremors of shock. Colt went to her, his face aching with a pain that was not from his wound. He put his arms around her, pulling her tight against his chest, holding her as she finally broke. They buried Sam under a lone, wind-scarred pine on a hill overlooking the basin. Colt dug the grave himself, his movements methodical, his newly healed side pulling with every shovelful of earth. Willa wrapped the boy's body in a clean blanket, her hands steady, her face a pale, tearless mask. The grief was too deep for tears. It was a cold, heavy stone in her stomach. She had killed him. She had killed the boy who had saved her apples. They stood over the fresh mound of dirt, two small figures in a vast, empty landscape. The silence was absolute. He had a mother in Cheyenne, Willa whispered, her voice a dry rasp. Colt did not answer. He just looked at the grave, then at his hands. He had killed, too. He had killed to defend, but this felt different. This was the cost of their victory, and it was a terrible price. We cannot stay here," Willa said, the words choking her. Colt looked at her. He saw the horror in her eyes, the way she was shaking. He saw her looking at the line shack, the place of the gunfight, and he knew what she meant. "No," he said, his voice quiet. "We will not." He took her hand. It was cold. He led her away from the grave, away from the shack, to the rise of land where their new cabin stood, half finished. "We work," he said. It was not a suggestion. It was a prescription. It was the only medicine he knew. "We build. We make this land ours. Not with this." He gestured to the grave. "But with this." He held up his calloused, scarred hands. And so they worked. The work was their salvation. It was a penance, and it was a prayer. In the first few days, they did not speak of the fight. They did not speak of her father, or of Sam. They spoke only of the cabin. "The next log. The mud is too thin. Hold this steady." Colt's body healed. The wound in his side closed, leaving a new, puckered scar. Another mark in his collection. But he was different. The bitterness that had defined him, the defensive crouch he had lived in, was gone. He moved with a new purpose. He was no longer a man just surviving. He was a man building. Willa's body changed, too. The blisters on her hands had long since been replaced by thick, hard calluses. Her arms, once pale and soft, were now roped with lean muscle from hauling stones and lifting logs. She had hacked her hair short with a knife, and the sun had burned her skin a healthy brown. Freckles scattered across her nose. When she caught her reflection in the creek, she saw a stranger. She saw a woman she did not know, but one she was beginning to respect. The cabin rose, log by log. It was not large, but it was solid. It had 2 rooms, a real plank floor, and a fireplace built of river stone that Willa had pieced together with her own hands. It was a fortress of their own making. As the cabin rose, the land bloomed. They were deep into summer. The drought that plagued the rest of the territory had turned the surrounding prairies to a tinder dry brown. But their basin, fed by the secret spring Colt had known about, was a miracle of green. The Willow Creek ran full and clear. The grass was knee-high. Their neighbors noticed. The first to come was Henderson. He rode in one hot July afternoon, 2 men with him, stopping his horse 100 yards from the new cabin. He was a small, tough man, his face weathered like old leather. He looked at the cabin, at the long, sturdy fence line, and at the green grass his own cattle were desperate for. Colt met him, walking out alone, his rifle left on the porch. He stopped 10 paces from the horses. "Maddox," Henderson said, his voice gruff. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Heard you had some trouble." "Some," Colt agreed. "Heard Holt is gone." "That is what I hear." Henderson's eyes flicked to Willa, who was standing on the unfinished porch, her hands tightly clenched. He looked back at Colt. "So, the Holt land is now Maddox's land." "This land was never Holt's," Colt said, his voice even. "It is my wife's and mine." The words, "my wife's," hung in the dry air. Henderson processed them. He had come expecting a new tyrant, a new Thaddeus Holt, a man who would hoard the water just as the old one would have. "That spring," Henderson said, getting to the point. "It is running full." "It is," Colt said. "My cattle, they are thinning. The creek on my land is dry as a bone." This was the moment. Colt looked at Willa. She met his gaze. She knew, as he did, that they could not build a life here on an island. They could not hold this land if they were surrounded by enemies. Willa walked down from the porch. She walked right up to Henderson's horse, her gaze steady. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice clear. "Your land borders ours on the east. That new fence, it is the legal line, but water is not something a person can own." Henderson looked down at her, astonished. "Bring your cattle to the creek," she said, "not to graze, but to drink. There is enough for all of us, as long as you respect the line." Henderson stared. He had been fighting Thaddeus Holt for that water for a decade. He had lost men, he had lost cattle, and this woman, this Holt, was just giving it to him. He looked at Colt, who just nodded. "What the missus said." Henderson was silent for a long time. He looked at the green valley. He looked at the solid cabin. He looked at the woman in men's trousers and the scarred man who stood beside her. "I will be damned," he whispered. He pulled off his hat, a gesture of respect he had not given in years. "Ma'am, Maddox, I accept." He turned his horse. "My men will push 300 head to the creek tomorrow. We will respect the line." He rode away. Colt looked at Willa. He did not smile, but his eyes were bright. The war was over. The peace was beginning. Months passed. The heat of summer gave way to the sharp, golden light of autumn. They finished the cabin. They built a real barn. Colt bought a dozen head of cattle from Henderson, trading work for stock. The harvest was good. The small patch of land they had tilled by the creek had produced beans and corn and squash. It was not much, but it was theirs, grown from their own soil. "We should," Willa said one evening, watching the sun set, "have a gathering." Colt looked at her like she was mad. "A gathering?" "A harvest gathering, to thank the land, to meet our neighbors, properly." "Our neighbors," Colt scoffed. "Our neighbors are Henderson, who thought we were thieves, and a dozen other ranchers who think I am a half-breed drifter and you are a runaway." "They are people, Colt," she said softly. "Just like us. They are trying to survive. We have water. We have a home. It is time we stopped being a fortress and started being a ranch." He argued, but he knew she was right. He was a man who knew how to be alone. She was teaching him how to be a part of something. They sent word with Henderson, a simple invitation, a harvest supper at the Maddox Ranch. The day came, a crisp, clear day in late October. Willa was terrified. She had cooked for 3 days. A haunch of venison Colt had shot, beans, cornbread, squash pies. She had no fine china. She had tin plates and tin cups, set out on a long, rough table they had built from the leftover pine logs. She had even put on a dress. It was one of 2 she had bought in Coulter, a simple, dark blue calico, practical and plain. It felt strange, after months in trousers. Colt, his face scrubbed, his hair slicked back with water, looked stiff and uncomfortable in a clean shirt. "No one will come," he grumbled, standing on the porch. They will come, she said, and they did. First, Henderson, with his wife, a small, quiet woman who brought a jar of pickled apples. Then, 2 more ranchers from the North Range, men who had openly scoffed at that drifter who had shacked up with Holt's daughter. They came on horseback, their rifles in their scabbards, their eyes wary. They ate. It was awkward. The men gathered around Colt by the new barn, talking in low voices about cattle prices, and the coming winter, and the clear, steady run of the Willow Creek. They looked at Colt's fences, at his solid barn. They saw the work. Their respect, given slowly and grudgingly, was real. Willa served the women. They were shy, rough-handed women who had not seen a lady in months. They looked at her fine, pale skin, and her hands, which were as calloused as their own. They did not know what to make of her. That is a fine cabin, Mrs. Maddox, Henderson's wife said, her voice timid. Thank you, Mary, Willa said, pouring her coffee. We built it ourselves. The woman's eyes widened. You, yourself? I laid the stones for the fireplace, Willa said, a small smile touching her lips. The women looked at each other. The ice was broken. They began to talk about the cold, about their children, about the land. Willa was no longer Willa Holt, the heiress. She was Willa Maddox, the woman who had built her own chimney, the woman who had given them water. As night fell, someone brought out a fiddle. The rough, cheerful music drifted across the basin. It was not a party. It was a gathering. It was rough and simple and real. Trust, Willa saw, was not a thing you were given. It was a thing you built, 1 log, 1 stone, 1 cup of coffee at a time. Late that night, after the last wagon had creaked away, the cabin was quiet. Willa came out onto the porch, rubbing her tired arms. Colt was not inside. He was leaning against a porch post, staring up at the sky. The basin was awash in starlight. The sky was a vast, glittering river of diamonds, so close she felt she could reach up and touch it. She stood beside him, her shoulder brushing his. They were quiet for a long time, just listening to the sound of the creek and the breathing of the land. I used to sleep out here, Colt said, his voice a low rumble. Before, I never liked roofs much. I always felt safer out here. He gestured to the stars. This was the only thing I had, the only thing that was real. Willa waited. She knew there was more. He said, his voice halting. I never figured on this. He nodded toward the cabin, the warm light spilling from the window. Or you. He turned to look at her, and in the faint starlight, she could see the old pain in his eyes, the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. A man like me, he said, and he touched his scar. A man, branded. A man who came from nothing. We do not get this. We do not get a home. We do not get warmth. He took her hand, his calloused thumb rubbing the back of hers. We do not get a woman like you. He looked away, back at the stars, ashamed of the admission. I never believed a man like me could have something like this, could be this. Willa felt her heart ache, a sweet, painful tightening. She saw him, not as the fierce fighter, not as her partner, but as the orphaned, beaten boy who had been told his whole life he was worthless. She squeezed his hand. You think you were branded Colt? She whispered. I was property. I was a name in a ledger. I was a thing to be polished and sold. I never thought I could choose. I never thought my life was mine to make. I was just a thing, trapped. She turned, her body facing his, her other hand coming up to touch his chest, right over his heart. You were the first person who saw me, she said,
her voice thick. Not a Holt, not an asset, not a girl to be protected or used. You saw the rage, the person underneath. You were not afraid of my father or of his money. You were just, you. She looked up, meeting his intense gaze. I never thought I could choose who I was. Colt, I never knew I could be this person. Until I met you. He did not speak. He just pulled her to him, his arms wrapping around her, holding her tight. He buried his face in her hair, and she felt the shudder that went through him. It was not a kiss. It was a fusion. It was two broken, solitary halves finally, truly, becoming whole. A month later, the first snow of the season dusted the high peaks. The deputy from Coulter, Ben, rode in, his horse blowing steam. Mrs. Maddox, he said, tipping his hat. He had a small wooden crate tied behind his saddle. This was left for you at the courthouse from a freight agent. Said it came from the east. Willa and Colt exchanged a look. Colt stood by her side as she took the crate. It was heavy. She carried it inside and set it on the table. Colt used his knife to pry open the lid. Inside, nestled in straw, was a single, dark green bottle of expensive bourbon, her father's bourbon. Beneath it was a single, folded piece of paper. Willa's hand trembled as she opened it. It was not a letter, it was just a note. 3 words, written in her father's elegant, angry script. You were right. That was all? Willa stared at the note. It was not an apology. It was not forgiveness. It was not love. It was an admission. A final, cold, empty surrender. He was gone. He had sold his ranch, his empire, and he had disappeared east, his power broken, his name in ruins. She did not cry. She felt a strange, cold release. It was truly, finally, over. Colt put his hand on her shoulder. He did not speak. He just stood there, his warmth a solid, living presence beside her. She folded the note. She put it in the stove. They watched the paper curl, turn brown, and vanish into ash. That afternoon, Willa went to the small chest where she kept her few belongings. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bundle of mud-stained, tattered, and torn ivory satin, the remnants of her wedding dress, the shroud she had worn when she had clawed her way out of the river. She had kept it, a reminder of the cage. She took the bundle and a shovel. Colt watched her, but he did not follow. He knew this was something she had to do alone. She walked to the spring, the source of their new life. A small, flowering chokecherry tree grew beside it. She dug a deep hole in the rich, dark earth. She looked at the ruined lace, the stiff, muddy silk. It was a symbol of her old life, of the girl who had been sold, the girl who had looked away. She placed the bundle in the hole and covered it with dirt. She was burying that girl. She was burying Willa Holt. She stood, wiping her hands on her trousers. It was never about the veil. It was never about the dress, or even, really, about the land. It was about choosing her own name, and having the courage to share it with someone who finally, truly, saw her. The next morning, the sun rose in a blaze of pink and gold, painting the new snow on the mountains. Colt and Willa rode out, side by side. He was on Buck, she on a spirited bay mare she had bought from Henderson. They were not running. They were riding their fence line, checking for breaks before the deep winter set in. The air was cold and clean and still. They rode past their home, a solid, warm cabin with a curl of smoke rising from the stone chimney. They rode past the land that bloomed, even under a touch of frost. They stopped on the ridge, looking out at the world that was theirs. They were tired, they were free, and they were, in their own quiet, scarred, and fierce way, deeply in love. They had nothing promised to them but the land beneath their boots and the fire in their hearts. Thank you for listening to this story.
We would love to hear your thoughts, so please comment below and let us know where you are listening from, so you can connect with other listeners. Do not forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel.